Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I'm so glad you've joined me today because we need to have an important and honest conversation about something that's affecting pigeon racing worldwide, yet many of us are hesitant to discuss it openly. Today we're talking about the hidden dangers of overbreeding in racing pigeons, and why this practice might be doing more harm than good to our beloved sport and the birds we care so deeply about. Before we dive in, I want you to know that this isn't about pointing fingers or making anyone feel bad about their breeding choices. We've all been there, caught up in the excitement of trying to create the next super pigeon, the next champion that will dominate the skies. But as someone who's been in this sport for many years and has seen both the incredible highs and the heartbreaking lows, I believe it's time we had this conversation. Let's start by understanding what we mean when we talk about overbreeding. In simple terms, overbreeding happens when we prioritize quantity over quality, when we breed too many birds too frequently without giving proper consideration to their genetic health, physical condition, or overall well-being. It's when the drive to produce winners becomes so intense that we lose sight of what's best for the birds themselves. Overbreeding can take many forms. Sometimes it's breeding the same pair over and over again because they produced one good bird, hoping lightning will strike twice. Sometimes it's breeding too many young birds from parents that haven't proven themselves worthy of reproduction. Other times it's the practice of inbreeding, where we breed closely related birds together in hopes of concentrating desirable traits, without considering the risks that come with this approach. Now you might be thinking, but surely breeding more birds gives us better chances of finding that special one, right? On the surface, this logic seems sound. After all, if you have 100 young birds instead of 10, statistically you should have more potential winners. But here's where the reality becomes much more complex and, frankly, concerning. When we focus purely on numbers, we often compromise on the fundamental principles that create truly great racing pigeons. We start to overlook important factors like genetic diversity, individual bird health, proper development time, and the careful selection process that has historically produced the greatest champions in our sport. Think about it this way. Imagine you're a baker trying to make the perfect loaf of bread. You could rush the process, use shortcuts, and produce 50 loaves in a day. But chances are, most of those loaves won't be very good. Alternatively, you could take your time, use quality ingredients, follow proper techniques, and maybe produce only 5 loaves, but each one would be exceptional. The same principle applies to breeding racing pigeons. The health implications of overbreeding are far more serious than many people realize. When we breed birds excessively, or without proper planning, we start to see a cascade of problems that affect not just individual birds but entire bloodlines and even the sport as a whole. One of the most immediate concerns is the physical toll on breeding pairs. Female pigeons, in particular, can suffer greatly when asked to produce clutch after clutch without adequate recovery time. Egg-laying and raising young birds is incredibly demanding on a hen's body. She needs time to rebuild her calcium reserves, restore her energy levels, and return to optimal physical condition before being asked to breed again. When we push hens to breed too frequently, we often see problems like soft-shelled eggs, calcium deficiency, weakened immune systems, and overall poor health. These stressed and depleted hens may produce offspring, but those offspring are often starting life at a disadvantage, inheriting not just their parents' genes, but also the consequences of their parents' poor physical condition at the time of breeding. The same applies to cock birds, though perhaps less obviously. A male pigeon that's constantly breeding may not be able to provide the best genetic material or the proper care and attention to his offspring. Quality sperm production requires good nutrition, adequate rest, and optimal health conditions. When we overuse breeding males, we compromise these factors. But the real danger lies in what happens to the genetic health of our bloodlines over time. This is where things get really concerning, and why every serious pigeon fancier needs to understand these concepts. When we practice overbreeding, especially combined with inbreeding, we start to see what geneticists call a reduction in genetic diversity. Think of genetic diversity as nature's insurance policy. In a genetically diverse population, there are many different versions of genes, and this variety helps ensure that the population can adapt to challenges, resist diseases, and maintain overall health. However, when we repeatedly breed the same birds or closely related birds, we start to narrow this genetic pool. We might be concentrating some desirable traits like speed or navigation ability, but we're also concentrating everything else, including genetic weaknesses and predispositions to health problems. Here's a real-world example that might help illustrate this point. Let's say you have a fantastic racing cock that consistently produces good offspring. It's natural to want to use him extensively in your breeding program. So you pair him with multiple hens, and some of his offspring show promise. Then you might breed those offspring back to their father or to each other, trying to concentrate his winning genes. At first, this might seem to work. You might get some really impressive birds. But what you can't see is what's happening underneath the surface. That champion cock might carry hidden genetic weaknesses that only become apparent when they're concentrated through repeated inbreeding. Maybe he carries genes that predispose birds to respiratory problems or heart conditions or weaken immune systems. In the first generation, these problems might not show up because they're balanced by healthier genes from the other parent. But as you continue to inbreed, these hidden weaknesses become more and more concentrated until suddenly you have a line of birds that looks great on paper but struggles with chronic health issues. The signs of genetic weakness in racing pigeons can be subtle at first, but they become more apparent as the problems accumulate over generations. One of the first things experienced fanciers notice is a general lack of vitality in young birds. These birds might develop normally in terms of size and appearance, but they lack that spark, that eager alertness that characterizes healthy young pigeons. You might notice that your young birds are more susceptible to common diseases. What used to be minor health challenges that birds would shake off easily now become major problems requiring extensive treatment. Respiratory infections become more frequent and more severe. Digestive issues that were once rare start appearing regularly. Another telltale sign is inconsistent performance. You might have birds that look absolutely perfect with all the physical characteristics you've been selecting for, but when it comes to actual racing performance, they're disappointing. They might lack stamina, get lost easily, or simply not have the drive and determination that makes a great racing pigeon. Fertility problems also become more common in overbred lines. You might find that your breeding pairs have difficulty producing fertile eggs, or that many eggs fail to hatch. Even when chicks do hatch, they might be weak, slow to develop, or have obvious physical abnormalities. One of the most concerning long-term effects is the loss of natural immunity. Wild pigeons are remarkably hardy birds, capable of surviving in challenging conditions and resisting a wide variety of diseases. This natural resilience is one of the reasons pigeons have been such successful companions to humans throughout history. However, when we overbreed and narrow the genetic pool, we can inadvertently breed out this natural immunity. The result is birds that are increasingly dependent on human intervention to stay healthy. What should be robust, self-sufficient athletes become fragile creatures that require constant medication and careful management just to survive. This creates a vicious cycle. As our birds become more susceptible to disease, we rely more heavily on medications and treatments. This might keep individual birds alive and functioning, but it doesn't address the underlying genetic weakness. In fact, it might make the problem worse by allowing genetically weak birds to survive and reproduce, passing on their susceptibilities to the next generation. I've seen lofts where the owner spends more time and money on medications than on feed, where birds that should be the pinnacle of athletic achievement instead require daily supplements and regular veterinary intervention just to maintain basic health. This isn't the natural order of things, and it's not sustainable for our sport. Now, let's talk about how we can avoid these pitfalls and focus on breeding for quality rather than quantity. The good news is that with some patience, planning, and discipline, we can maintain healthy bloodlines while still producing competitive racing pigeons. The first principle is to breed only your very best birds. This sounds obvious, but it's amazing how often we compromise on this basic rule. Just because a bird is available for breeding doesn't mean it should be bred. Only birds that have proven themselves through consistent performance, demonstrated good health, and shown the temperament and characteristics we want to perpetuate should be considered for breeding. This means being honest about your bird's qualities and limitations. That hen that had one good race but was otherwise mediocre? She's probably not breeding material. That cock that looks spectacular but consistently disappoints in performance? He should be enjoying retirement, not producing offspring. Quality selection also means looking beyond just racing performance. Health, longevity, fertility, and the ability to pass on good qualities to offspring are all important factors. Some of the best breeding birds are not necessarily the flashiest racers, but they consistently produce offspring that perform well and maintain good health throughout their careers. Another crucial principle is maintaining genetic diversity in your bloodlines. This means regularly introducing new blood from unrelated, high-quality sources. Yes, this can be expensive and sometimes risky, but it's essential for the long-term health of your breeding program. When I say introduce new blood, I don't mean randomly buying birds from any source. The new genetics should be carefully selected from proven bloodlines that complement your existing birds. Research the background of potential new additions. Look for birds from families known for longevity, health, and consistent performance over multiple generations. It's also important to keep detailed records of your breeding program. Track not just which birds you breed and what offspring they produce, but also health issues, performance results, and any patterns you notice over time. This information becomes invaluable for making informed breeding decisions and identifying potential problems before they become serious. Let me share some real examples of how these principles work in practice. I know a fancier in Belgium who built one of the most successful racing lofts in Europe by following these exact principles. Instead of breeding 30 or 40 young birds each year, like many of his competitors, he focuses on producing just 12 to 15 exceptional birds annually. He keeps only 3 breeding pairs, each carefully selected over many years of observation and testing. These pairs are given optimal care, proper rest between breeding cycles, and are only bred when conditions are perfect. His success rate is remarkable. While his competitors might get 1 or 2 truly competitive birds from their large crops, he regularly gets 8 to 10 top performers from his small, carefully planned breeding program. Another example comes from Australia, where a fancier inherited a loft full of inbred birds that were struggling with health issues. Instead of continuing the same breeding practices, he made the difficult decision to start fresh. He kept only 2 hens from his original stock, both showing good health and some racing ability despite their genetic challenges. He then invested in completely unrelated breeding cocks from 3 different bloodlines, each with proven track records for producing healthy, long-lived performers. It took several years to see results, but the transformation was remarkable. Within 5 years, he had developed a line of birds known throughout the region for their robust health and consistent performance. These examples illustrate an important point about patience in breeding programs. Good genetics take time to develop and prove themselves. The pressure to produce immediate results often leads to the shortcuts and compromises that create overbreeding problems in the first place. Ethical breeding practices go beyond just genetic considerations. They also involve providing optimal care for breeding birds and their offspring. This means proper nutrition during breeding season, adequate housing that isn't overcrowded, and careful attention to the physical and mental well-being of all birds in the breeding program. Breeding birds should be in peak physical condition before being paired. This means they've had adequate recovery time from racing season, have been properly conditioned with good food and exercise, and shown no signs of health problems. Breeding sick or stressed birds is not only unethical, it's counterproductive, as it increases the likelihood of producing weak offspring. The timing of breeding is also crucial. Many successful fanciers breed their birds only once per year, allowing each pair to put all their energy into producing and raising one exceptional clutch rather than multiple mediocre ones. This approach typically results in stronger, healthier young birds that have received optimal care from their parents. Environmental factors play a huge role in successful breeding as well. Breeding birds need quiet, stress-free conditions with plenty of space, good ventilation, and protection from disturbances. Overcrowded breeding lofts, where multiple pairs are competing for space and resources, often produce poor results regardless of the genetic quality of the breeding stock. Nutrition during breeding season deserves special attention. Breeding birds have significantly higher nutritional requirements than birds at rest or even birds in training. They need high-quality protein for egg production and chick development, adequate fats for energy, and a full spectrum of vitamins and minerals. Calcium is particularly important for hens producing eggs and feeding young birds. Many breeding problems that appear to be genetic are actually nutritional. Birds fed inadequate diets during breeding season may produce weak offspring that struggle throughout their lives. These nutritional deficiencies can even affect the genetic expression of the offspring, meaning that potentially good birds may never reach their full potential due to poor early nutrition. The care of young birds is equally important. Rushed weaning, inadequate early nutrition, or stressful conditions during development can handicap even genetically superior birds. Young birds need time to develop properly, both physically and mentally, before being subjected to the demands of training and racing. This brings us to another important aspect of avoiding overbreeding problems, the selection and testing of young birds. Not every bird produced, even by the best breeding pairs, will be suitable for racing or further breeding. A crucial part of maintaining quality is the willingness to cull birds that don't meet standards. This doesn't necessarily mean destroying birds, but it does mean being honest about their potential and not allowing inferior birds to continue in your breeding program simply because they're available. Many successful fanciers give their culled birds to other fanciers who can enjoy them as pets or use them in less competitive situations. The testing process for young birds should be thorough and honest. This includes not just racing performance, but also health, temperament, intelligence, and the physical characteristics that indicate genetic quality. Birds that consistently underperform or show signs of genetic weakness should not be considered for breeding, regardless of their bloodline or the reputation of their parents. One effective method used by many top fanciers is the gradual selection process. Instead of making breeding decisions based on limited information, they observe and test birds over multiple seasons. A bird might show promise in its first year, but fail to maintain that promise as it matures. Conversely, some birds are late developers that become outstanding performers in their second or third years. This patient approach to selection helps ensure that only truly superior birds are used for breeding, which is essential for maintaining genetic quality over the long term. It also helps identify birds that not only perform well themselves, but have the genetic makeup to consistently pass on their good qualities to their offspring. Record keeping becomes crucial in this process. Detailed records of each bird's performance, health history, and breeding results help identify patterns and make informed decisions about future breeding plans. These records should include not just wins and losses, but also observations about racing style, recovery time, susceptibility to various health issues, and behavior in different conditions. Technology can be a valuable tool in maintaining these records. Many fanciers now use computer programs or smartphone apps to track their birds' information, making it easier to analyze patterns and make breeding decisions based on comprehensive data rather than just recent memories or impressions. The benefits of focusing on quality over quantity extend far beyond just producing better racing birds. Healthy, genetically diverse bloodlines are more enjoyable to work with, require less medical intervention, and provide more consistent results. They're also more likely to maintain their quality over time, creating a sustainable breeding program that can continue producing good birds for many years. From a financial perspective, quality breeding programs are often more economical in the long run. While the initial investment in top-quality breeding stock might be higher, the reduced veterinary costs, higher success rates, and better reputation that comes from producing consistently good birds often more than compensate for the higher upfront costs. There's also the satisfaction that comes from knowing you're contributing positively to the sport. Breeders who focus on genetic health and quality help maintain the overall quality of racing pigeons, ensuring that future generations of fanciers will have access to birds capable of the amazing performances that make our sport so compelling. The social aspect shouldn't be overlooked either. Breeders known for producing healthy, high-quality birds develop reputations that open doors to collaboration with other serious fanciers. These relationships can lead to opportunities to work with even better bloodlines and learn from more experienced breeders. Education plays a crucial role in addressing overbreeding problems in our sport. Many fanciers, especially those new to breeding, simply don't understand the long-term consequences of their breeding decisions. They see successful fanciers with large numbers of birds and assume that more is automatically better. This is where experienced fanciers have a responsibility to share their knowledge and guide newcomers towards sustainable breeding practices. Pigeon racing clubs and organizations can play a valuable role by providing education about genetic principles, breeding ethics, and the importance of maintaining genetic diversity. Online communities and resources like this channel also have an important role to play in spreading awareness about these issues. The more fanciers understand the science behind breeding and the long-term consequences of their decisions, the better choices they're likely to make. It's also important to address the competitive pressures that sometimes drive overbreeding practices. In some racing communities, there's an unspoken assumption that having large numbers of birds indicates success or serious commitment to the sport. This pressure can push fanciers toward quantity-focused breeding programs, even when they understand the problems with this approach. Changing these cultural attitudes requires leadership from respected figures in the sport and recognition systems that value breeding ethics and genetic stewardship alongside racing performance. Some organizations have begun to incorporate breeding ethics into their award systems, recognizing not just the fastest birds, but also the breeders who consistently produce healthy, long-lived performers. The future of our sport depends on our ability to maintain genetic diversity and health in our racing pigeons. As urbanization continues and the number of people involved in pigeon racing faces challenges in many parts of the world, the genetic resources we have become even more precious. Every breeding decision we make today affects not just our own lofts, but the entire gene pool available to future generations of pigeon fanciers. This is a serious responsibility that goes beyond our personal competitive goals and touches on our role as stewards of these remarkable birds. Climate change and environmental pressures also make genetic diversity more important than ever. Birds with broad genetic backgrounds are more likely to be able to adapt to changing conditions and continue performing well as the world around them changes. Narrow, inbred populations are much more vulnerable to environmental stresses and new disease challenges. Looking ahead, there are exciting developments in genetic testing and breeding science that may help us make even better breeding decisions in the future. Some fanciers are already using DNA testing to identify genetic markers associated with performance and health, allowing for more informed breeding choices. However, technology should complement, not replace, the fundamental principles of good breeding practices. No amount of genetic testing can substitute for careful observation, patient selection, and the wisdom that comes from years of experience working with pigeons. As we wrap up today's discussion, I want to emphasize that addressing overbreeding problems doesn't mean abandoning ambition or accepting mediocrity. Quite the opposite. By focusing on quality, maintaining genetic diversity, and breeding ethically, we can actually improve our chances of producing truly exceptional racing pigeons. The greatest champions in pigeon racing history have typically come from bloodlines that were carefully developed over many years by breeders who understood these principles. They weren't produced by breeding factories that prioritize quantity over quality, but by thoughtful breeding programs that balance genetic health with performance goals. I encourage every fancier watching this video to take an honest look at their own breeding practices. Are you breeding for the right reasons? Are you maintaining genetic diversity in your bloodlines? Are you giving your breeding birds the care and recovery time they need? Are you being selective enough in choosing which birds to breed? These aren't always easy questions to answer, and making changes to established breeding programs can be challenging. But the long-term health of our birds and our sport depends on our willingness to prioritize quality over quantity and genetic health over short-term gains. I'd love to hear about your experiences with breeding programs, both successes and challenges. Have you noticed signs of genetic weakness in your bloodlines? What strategies have you used to maintain genetic diversity? Have you made changes to your breeding practices based on health concerns? Your experiences and insights could be valuable to other fanciers facing similar challenges. If you found this information helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. We're committed to providing honest, educational content about all aspects of pigeon racing, including the difficult topics that don't always get discussed openly. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos about breeding strategies, genetic principles, and other topics that can help you develop a more successful and sustainable breeding program. Remember, the goal isn't just to win races today, but to contribute to a sport that will continue to thrive for generations to come. By breeding responsibly and prioritizing the health and welfare of our birds, we ensure that future pigeon fanciers will have access to the same amazing birds that have made our sport so rewarding. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep your birds healthy and your breeding practices ethical.